Hello.
Hello. Hi. How many of us are here?
It's just us. What a beautiful background.
Yeah, it's quite nice, isn't it? I'm actually in the cafe of the British Library.
Ah, wonderful.
Where are you?
San Francisco.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, it's 4 o'clock here, so it must be a bit a different time where you are.
Yeah, it's 8 in the morning here.
Right. Okay. Good.
I
So,
think we're I think we have one other papyrologist confirmed and uh uh Professor Nicolardi.
oh, right. Federica.
Yeah.
She's very young. She probably doesn't need to be called professor. She's very good too.
Excellent. Oh, let's see. We have Stephen Parsons, who's the graduate student on the uh, University of Kentucky side of things.
Oh, yes. I saw a lot of questions from you, Mr. Parsons. Hello.
Oh, hey, Stephen, I think you're muted still.
Not showing me my own picture. Should it or
I'm not sure. I can see you just fine, so
good.
I
You
think
can
it's
even see my
working.
cup of tea, can you?
No. Oh, there we go.
£2.25 now for a cup of tea at the British Library. It's called inflation.
2.25 for a cup of tea. What has
And that's
come
pounds, not
with
and
the
that's
British?
pounds. That's
Yeah,
pounds, not
yeah,
dollars. That's more like $3.
Let me see if there were any more questions that people sent in. Oh yeah, there was one more last minute one. Oh, we have so many questions. We have to kind of prioritize a little.
Question for you: is the chat going to be open?
Yes, yeah. So there will be there's a chat on the YouTube. Oh, there's
I could
Luke.
put into it an article of mine called "How to Read and Reconstruct a Herculaneum Papyrus," which people might
Oh
find.
yeah, I think we
Public
actually
domain.
yeah, I think we actually list that on our frequently asked questions page. I think we
Okay.
listed your to your article, but yeah, feel free to post it.
We love that article.
Maybe I'll do
Yeah.
that now.
Yeah, very good. I don't know if the Zoom chat and the YouTube stream chat are linked, but if you post it in the Zoom chat, I'll copy it over to the YouTube chat.
Oh, okay. This is the Zoom chat that we're in.
Yeah, I think so. I think the YouTube. I won't send you the YouTube live stream because usually when we open that, then you get like crosstalk and stuff. But we have one person in the YouTube chat, Luke, who is very excited.
Good.
Posting a bunch of scroll emojis.
Uh-huh.
Luke was one of our first prize winners because he was very early in making a bunch of software.
Right.
That's good. Good to see him here. Stephen, can you say something again and see if your audio works now?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, great.
I couldn't hear you either at first. My headphones just had to be played with for a minute.
Gotcha.
Sounds better.
Getting all my windows set up here so I can see the chat and you all and the questions.
Very good.
Now, how do I do this? Yes, that's the way to do it. Okay.
Who else are we expecting, JP?
Let's see. Federica Nicolardi.
Federica.
And
Federica.
Federica, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't know if maybe someone else will join, but I think that is going to be it.
On our side, we don't know how many other people are joining, right?
Right. So we are streaming this to YouTube.
Right.
So we won't have anyone else sort of joining in. Yeah. We have I think seven people watching now. But it's also recorded, so people can.
Okay. So they can't ask. We can't interact with them directly.
No, well, they can post in the YouTube chat, and I will read what they post there.
I get it. You've got a very interesting cross section on the back there, Stephen, behind you.
Thank you.
It looks as though it's parts of two rolls. With one on the left, a small part of it, and then another one on the right. They're stuck together.
To my knowledge, is one roll. There's kind of the center there, and then here. Are you looking over here at this part?
No, I'm looking on your right side.
Oh, the other way.
Yeah, that side. The thing is going. Oh, I see. Yeah, well, possibly it's two. I'd have to see the whole circumference, but it's conceivable that you've got two rolls there. Hello. Hi, Federica. Buonasera.
Ciao. Buonasera.
Ciao. E Gianluca è qui, non è vero?
Sì.
Sì, è Gianluca. Buongiorno.
I have changed from last time. A little bit.
Sono a Londra, alla Biblioteca Nazionale. L'altro Biblioteca Nazionale, dico.
But this is
sorry, we better go back, hadn't we?
It's Cabrio on your back or in the screen. What is this? What is the image?
I couldn't hear that. There's a very powerful echo where you are.
Oh.
Over.
Wait, I think he was asking about the background of Stevens.
Yes.
Oh, mine's one of the scrolls. I thought he was asking about your background, Dr. Jenko.
It's a great one. My background is Greece.
It's Greece.
It's
Greece. He thought
Southern
it was
Greece.
Cool. Well, I think we have our group here. Let me see how many people we have on the stream. Oh, we have 10 people watching, and we even have Nat. Hey, Nat, how's it going?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm not able to turn on video right now, but excited to listen in.
Excellent. Yeah, so we have a whole list of questions, but before we jump into that, maybe Professor Jenko and Nicolardi can introduce themselves really quick so everyone knows who you are.
You've actually got three professors here.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Except that one of them is the mayor of a city in Italy as well.
Not at all. I finished my change as mayor.
Oh, you finished that?
Yes.
Okay.
I am completely free now.
Oh, right. Okay. Did you choose not to run again, or did they throw you out?
No. I am just devoted to the papyrology now.
Ah, right. Okay. So, well, I'll introduce the others perhaps to start with. So there's Gianluca Del Mastro, who's now a professor of papyrology at the University of Campania, right?
Campania University, Vanvitelli.
Campania, which is, and Federica Nicolardi. Federica, what's your rank now?
I'm a researcher, so I'm a, let's say,
who's a researcher, Dr. Federica Nicolardi, one of the best people at reconstructing complete Herculaneum rolls, who's a researcher at the University of Naples, Federico Due, così, Frederick II, And I'm Richard Janko, and I'm a professor at the University of Michigan. And we've all made strenuous efforts over the years to try to recover and reconstruct the Herculaneum papyri that actually survive and were opened in the 18th and 19th centuries, which of course are in a much more damaged state than the ones of which we hope to be able soon to read scans. Anything else I should add to that, Jan Paul?
No, that's a great introduction. And for and this is also my first time meeting all of you. So that's very exciting, I think, for all of us. Yeah, and so I'm JP. I go I help run the competition, and then the other people we have here are Nat, who came up basically with the competition and is one of the sponsors, and Stephen, who's a graduate student at the University of Kentucky, and who has basically been one of the people kind of working on this project for many years, and who helped us kind of release the data and get everyone involved. And
so Stephen, are you in electrical engineering or computer science, or what's your specialty?
Computer science.
Right.
And
great.
with any luck, I'll be graduating in less than 2 months. I just scheduled my defense.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Stephen, do you maybe want to kick off the first question for
Sure.
our panel?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So some of these questions will get kind of technical. A lot of them are inspired by looking at images like this, and we're trying to figure out what are we looking at and how can we have sort of informed expectations about what this is. So we'll get into that. But we'll start a little bit less technical. We had a question, which is, what are the expected alphabets we might encounter in these scrolls? And I guess specifically, as we know the languages, I think pretty clearly to be Latin and Greek, but are there different scripts, and what scripts might we expect to come across?
Technical question for JP. Are we able to share our screens?
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen. There's like a button at the bottom in Zoom, and that should show on the live stream. Okay.
Well, while I look for an appropriate picture, perhaps Gianluca would like to begin with this one. Which scripts and alphabets are we going to get? Because Gianluca has created a wonderful facility called Cartes. Maybe you could share the link with these folks so that they could see images of the different scripts.
Yes, we at the moment we have just yes we can share Cartes. Cartes actually is the main database about the Herculaneum papyri, in which there are measures of papyri and information about the history of each papyrus, a lot of bibliographical information for each papyrus. There are thousands of entries. And also there are information about drawings of papyri made in 19th century. At the same time, we have just one multispectral spectral image of the first generation for each papyrus. So it's possible for each unroll the papyrus to see an exemplum, a specimen, and there is possibility to see one image for each papyrus to distinguish the different scribes, the different kind of inks, and the different kind of handwriting in the papyrus. This is I think a useful tool also for people participating in the Vesuvius challenge to see the difference between the differences between letters and the different kind of scribes in the papyrus. In Herculaneum papyri, we have at the moment we recognized almost 34, 35 different scribes. This is another useful information. There are no more than 40 scribes in the Herculaneum papyri. The different scribes come from the 3rd century BC until the 1st century AD. From the 3rd century BC until the 1st century AD. So we cover almost 4 centuries with our handwriting. Is a very important collection of different kind of scribes of handwritings in the Greek world. The most important, I think. From about the Latin papyri, we have just 60, 80 scrolls in Latin, with no more than 10 different ends. So we, I read the question, the different questions. We have possibilities, possibility to find new Greek papyri and less possibility to find the Latin papyri. On 10 possibilities, I think we can find surely the Greek papyri, and sometimes are very rare the Latin one. I think that in the not unrolled papyri there are most possibility to find the Greek one. This is the papyrus published by Richard in this is the last one, the 1994. Is a very beautiful papyrus.
Shall I come in now?
Yes, yes.
Hey.
Can you carry on something, Bob?
No, Gianluca has told you the basics here. Most of the papyri are going to be in Greek capital letters of various kinds. There's going to be a small minority that are in Latin. The Latin ones will either be in capital letters or they will be in a very peculiar cursive script, which is quite hard to decipher, even when you see it in perfect state. But the Greek capitals are the main ones, and this is one typical example. It's from the 1st century BCE, and this is a piece that was unrolled fairly continuously in the early 19th century. I think Gianluca was saying that the Cartes database is still available. Is that right, Gianluca?
Yes, it's completely available and completely free.
Would you like to put the web link into the chat?
Yeah, I linked. I put it in there. Yep.
Great, great. Shall I show some more examples of the writing?
Yeah, if you have more, that's yeah.
I probably do.
This looks fantastic, by the way. That's a good reconstruction.
Well, that's actually just a photograph. No work was required for that one. Here is another one. Let's see. I'm showing you these in black and white. Are you seeing that one?
Not yet.
Actually, that one doesn't show the contrast very well. Let's look for a better one.
We don't see your screen anymore, I think.
Ah, right. That was the problem. Yeah, share screen, right. Hold on. Wait a minute. There we go. No, not that one. Where is this? Basic, come on, yeah. Okay. There you go. Oh, that one doesn't show up the writing quite as well.
Maybe if you zoom in a bit, but
yeah, let's try to zoom in a bit. It's not wanting to. Wait a minute. Now you can see the writing. And again, this is in capitals, although it's rather more smoothed. It's a bit more flowing. Some of the Roman cursives have this kind of appearance to them, although of course the letters are Roman characters, not Greek ones. This is Greek characters, again, 1st century BCE, but quite a nice one. Let me see what else I can find for you guys.
Well, actually, maybe if we can linger on this one for a bit, and we can maybe talk about some of the other questions related sort of to the letters and so on. Like one that I found kind of interesting is, did people ever write over any other text? Like once the text maybe fades after a while, or like would they reuse papyrus and kind of write on it a second time?
I don't think that happens. They can erase little bits of the text with a sponge, but and write in something else where there's a mistake. But I don't know of any case where there's a reused papyrus. It's not like parchment where you get palimpsests. Do you agree, Gianluca and Federica?
I was just mentioning that it can happen in other papyri, but as far as I know, in Herculaneum papyri, there are no such cases, so no cases where we have a palimpsest.
1043 papyrus is just one case in which there is one letter from so-called descriptio inferior, but is a very rare. I think is impossible to find the other case. Is a rich library in which there are the elegant books. I think it would be very strange to find the other cases with the letters palimpsest.
Right.
Even in the rare cases where there was erasing, that would typically be done with a sponge.
Or just by crossing out.
Okay.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, I mean that makes our work easier, right? If there's not multiple layers to worry about. I think another. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, relatedly, or is this related to the cost of papyrus? Was it cheap enough that it wasn't necessary to reuse it? Is that, or is there some other reason?
This was a papyrus collection owned by a wealthy group of people. So I don't think they needed to be careful with papyrus the way ordinary people did.
Do we know anything about the cost of papyrus at that time for normal people, or not really?
There is some information, but it's not very clear because we don't really understand the system of different qualities of papyrus that existed.
I am writing a paper about this point, and there are it's very rare to find palimpsest papyri because cleaning to clean a papyrus was very unuseful because of there was the risk to remove fibers, so was very rare. There are a few cases on 100,000 papyri published. It happened just 100 times. It's very rare.
I think another thing that has come up a lot is how much variation is there, sort of in things like the sizes of letters, or like how much spacing they would have between the lines. Like, is that fairly consistent, or is there like a big difference?
Federica, why don't you answer this one?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So there can be variety.
Bit louder for folks.
Sorry?
Bit louder.
Okay. So there may be a great variety in this. So it depends on the type of letters that you have and on the type of alphabet that you have. Usually Latin script are larger. The letters are larger than the ones you find in a Greek papyrus. And also the layout of the text can be different. So in prose text, usually you have a column that is something like 4.5 up to 6 centimeters. That's probably the standard, the standard column. But you can also find in the Latin papyri, the column is much wider than in the Greek papyri, and that depends on the size of the letters, because the letters are much taller and larger than the ones you find in the Greek papyri. And also, when you're talking about different scribes, you have to bear in mind that the layout of the text may be different. You may have a column with, let's say, 27 lines per column. You can find also papyri where you have 39 letters, lines per column, and that depends on the different size of the interlinear space. So that can vary actually a lot in different roles.
What about the
layout in the same role? So usually the layout is not changing. There are cases, but very rare of layout changing in the middle of the role. But that's very rare. Usually you have the same layout throughout the role.
I think one of the inspirations for this line of questions is when we're looking at something from inside one of the rolled scrolls in CT and trying to find writing. We're trying to figure out, basically for any given section of this, what is the probability that this is an area with text on it versus a blank area? So what about the distribution of like the widths between columns and the margins at the top and bottom? Does that vary much?
I would say that 5/6 of the width is going to be letters, and then 1/6 would be blank.
Of the full scroll width or of columns?
Of the width of a column.
Okay.
And I would say that 3/4 of the length of the height of a scroll, 3/4 of it is going to be filled with writing, and then you'll have a margin at the top and a margin at the bottom. And the margin at the bottom is usually less big than the margin at the top. Is that what you think, Gianluca?
Yes, I think there are some measures that are very similar to from a papyri. There is a sort of a difference between the margin and the written space, but there is a sort of is very easy to find letters, because the most part of papyrus is full of ink. We have just some margin, not very large, not very large as in papyri from the 2nd or the 3rd century AD, for example. We have the margin sometimes are cut around, and we have another blank space, is the space between columns. So for people involved in the Vesuvius challenge, is very easy to find the letters. Is I think a little bit difficult to arrive just on the margin, but this is possible also through the slice of papyrus, because if the slice is focused on the center of papyrus, it's very easy to find ink. Instead, in the margin is very possible to find the blank space. So I can suggest to focus the research on the middle of each papyrus.
Right. Yeah, this photo shows it very nicely too, I think. Also sort of, yeah, the gap between columns. And
I have to say, in this one, the width of the top margin is less than the width of the bottom margin. And I think, in fact, I had it the wrong way round, that generally the width of the bottom margin is wider.
And also, if I can add something, so if you focus on the central part, of course, that's a great advice, I think. But also, you have to bear in mind that the beginning of the scroll may be not written at the beginning. So you may have the so-called agraphon, so a part that was not written, was not covered with handwriting. And the same may happen in the very center of the papyrus, at the very end of the roll. So I would suggest in general to just stay in the middle in all senses. So in the middle of the roll and in the middle of the column, let's say, in the central part. That could be a good solution, or at least to avoid the first, let's say, 10 to 20 centimeters from the beginning of the roll, and the same thing at the end of the roll. So that could be useful, I hope.
That was my next question, was how wide those are, but 10 to 20 centimeters on either end was often blank.
When Federica says the roll, she means the roll as it's unrolled. But for those of you doing research on the scans, what this means is don't go for the very middle of the spiral or the very beginning of the spiral. Try to work on some part that's not the very middle or the very beginning when it's looked at end on, the way it is in Stephen's background. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great.
Sorry,
yeah, I think
I interrupted your question. Over.
This makes me think of another question. Like what we see here is all text, and people were wondering if there's any like illustrations or sort of like fancy letters like you see like sort of in the Middle Ages and in books. Is it mostly text like this?
Well, again, we have one papyrus at least which has geometrical diagrams in it.
Oh wow, okay.
But you don't get fancy letters. But you might, as I said, get geometrical diagrams or something like that. You're not likely to get pictures or anything like that, I would say. But what do you guys think in Italy?
You may have some signs that look like illustrations. So the coronides, let's say, at the end of the roll or at the end of precise portion or region of text, you may have some sort of a little bird or something that looks like a little bird, and that's a coronis, so that's a sign in the text. But generally, yes, I agree perfectly with Professor Gianco. So you don't have illustrations or you don't have the fancy capital letters that you have in the medieval manuscripts.
But it's important to say, even the triangle or the other figures are in the same ink of the text. It's
right.
not a different ink. It's clear that it's the same hand.
Yeah, and I think that was also another question. Is there any sort of different? Yeah. Usually people use the same ink throughout the scroll, right? There's like no different colors or things like that.
You don't have different colors. You may have different inks though, because you may have someone that is someone who's intervening later in the text, correcting it or adding notes or something like that. So in that case, you may actually spot a different ink.
Oh, okay.
For example, for instance, you may have a black ink compared to a brownish ink or something like that. So you may find different inks, but you won't find a red ink in the papyrus. So just
how common is it that people add something later or write with a different ink? Is that common at all?
Yeah.
Well, not wildly common. There's going to be a main ink, and then there might be a secondary ink.
Sometimes. Okay, interesting.
Very occasionally, the scribe changes in the course of a roll. At one point in this roll, the main scribe went away and handed the job over to someone else. And that person made such a mess of copying the next 10 columns that the main hand then went through and corrected a lot of the mistakes that this subordinate had made.
Oh, wow.
He resumed copying it.
Do we know anything about how often a scribe would dip the pen in ink?
That's a great question. My guess is maybe every 3 columns. No, every 3 columns they would sharpen the pen. That's what I meant to say. And that makes the ink, the letters thinner, because they get thicker as it goes on. But I assume they had to dip it into the ink pot every several times each line, wouldn't you think, you guys?
It's very difficult to say, I think, because I think when the scribe is very good, you can't notice such a thing, because you will probably be very consistent in that. So you won't spot any difference in the thickness of a letter, of a stroke. So it is very difficult to answer this question. In some cases, you may find lines that are very, so the strokes are lighter, because probably the ink was finishing or something like that. But yeah, I think at least once per line, perhaps, that at least, I would say.
I remember
that's interesting.
I remember a papyrus is 1425. Is on poems by Philodemus, is a draft. This is important matters. There are draft and final copies also. In this draft, sometimes there are some part of ink fall from the pen directly on papyrus. That means that the pen was very was not good pen. Was just a pen used for the draft. This is an important suggestion also for people involving in the challenge, that there are different kind to think the text. There are some drafts and there are some final copies, and there are some differences in the layout, in the ink, in the columns. Is a very rich library in which there are also draft and final copies, and so it's important to distinguish between both two, because there are differences in the layout, especially.
What kind of differences are there with the drafts? Can we, for example, expect like entirely blank areas where they just haven't gotten to yet, or?
Entirely blank space, not just as Federica says, at the end there is a 2 or 3 sheets of papyrus completely blank, but sometimes there are some corrections or some additions, or part completely erased in the draft. This is a blank space at the end of papyrus on poems.
Yes,
by Richard Jake.
And this is a very interesting. This is a very interesting case, because it ought to have the title and the name of the author in this blank space, and it doesn't. But it should have it. And you can see this is at the very end, because the different ridges in the papyrus, which denote the folds when it was rolled up, are getting shorter and shorter towards the end. I don't know if you can see those vertical lines. Those are getting shorter and shorter. And at the very end, the bottom part is rolled upon itself. You can see how it actually ends. And there was never any writing there, unfortunately, because we would like to have confirmation of who wrote this, of course. But in the drafts, what you do find, and this was recently demonstrated by Claudio Vergara. Am I allowed to announce this to the world? What Claudio found in his thesis, that there's writing on the back at the very end of the roll.
Oh, interesting.
So in that case, apparently the person ran out of space on this side of the roll and started to write on the back. There's another draft. There's another draft. Well, I don't think Claudio's text was a draft, but there's another draft where the Philodemus added passages on the back, possibly even in his own handwriting. And that's a very exciting copy as well. So although normally you will only get writing on one side of the papyrus, sometimes you get it on two sides, which is a very remarkable phenomenon, and of course would make reading the papyrus much more complicated, however you're going to do it.
And so this was mostly just because they run out of space or they want to add something.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. There were also a bunch of, yeah, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add, so you were talking about completely blank spaces, and we saw that this is usually not the case. What you may find is the opposite, so completely written spaces, because there are some papyri, especially I'm thinking about 1021, which is a draft. In that case, you can find handwriting even in the margins that are completely full with text that is added in the lower margin, or you may also find text in the intercolumnial space, or in the space between the different columns. So that is something you can also, that's not very common, but it can happen anyway, to have a space that is completely covered with handwriting.
Yeah, and I would guess we should probably recommend people to look at the Cartes tool and just look at a lot of different photos and pages to get a sense of all the differences and so on.
Number 1021 is the one that Federica just talked about, 1021. Okay. That's a good one to look at.
Great. I think another set of
Go ahead, JP.
Oh, no, go for it.
We might be about to talk about the same thing, which is there is a set of questions related to the material itself, like papyrus.
Just what I was going to say.
And how it's made and its thickness and what we're looking at here. So I'll just sort of start with one such question. Papyrus, as we understand, is made by its fibers of the papyrus plant, which are extracted into strips that are then laid atop one another. How many layers of strips can we expect to see in one papyrus sheet? Is it always two, or are there cases where there are more, or what is that?
That's easy. Always two.
Always two. Only
wow.
Yes, this is
you have the place where yes. Two different collemata, two different sheets are glued one to another. In that case, you can find 4 different layers of papyrus, because you have 2 layers from one sheet and 2 layers from another sheet. In very rare cases, one strip was removed, so in that case you only have 3 layers, but usually you have 2 different layers of papyrus in throughout the roll, except for the collese, so the regions where you have the different sheets, one on top of the other. In those cases, you have 4.
And in those cases, is the join hammered? Like, is it thicker there, or is it hammered so smooth that the thickness is consistent? Like, would we expect to observe much of a difference in an image like this, or is it unclear?
I think in a scan you should be able to see it. I would say, but I don't know.
For us, it's very difficult to distinguish between a single sheet and a collesis. I mean, the join between 2 sheets is very difficult for us. Sometimes it's possible, maybe in this picture shown by Richard, it's possible to see in the middle a collesis is very clear here. But for us, it's very difficult. The thickness is the same, is pretty the same, because papyrus was completely pressed. So it's difficult to distinguish. But in this case, there are 4 different layers of papyrus. One sheet is wide between 6 and 12 or 13 centimeters, and the overlapping is 1 centimeter or 2.
Oh, very, very small. Okay.
Yeah, so the
Let me just comment on the picture that I'm showing you. If you look at the fragment on the left side of the screen, down the middle of it, you can see a line, and I've got a plus sign which is moving down that line right now. Can you see that, folks?
Yep.
Yes.
That is the line of the colesis, and the thickness of the overlap moves from the left to the right, where the plus sign, where I'm moving that plus sign, and that's where there's an overlap. And the papyrus often breaks before the colesis overlap starts.
Right.
And that's what's happened here. These sheets of papyrus that were glued together were about 16 centimeters wide, and there were about 100 of them in this roll. So you can see that quite effectively, but in each sheet of papyrus, there's always only 2 pieces. These are actually separate sheets and they're glued together. And I think the thickness of the papyrus was 0.1 of a millimeter.
That would be one sheet.
The thickness of a sheet of papyrus consisting of 2 layers, which are laid crosswise to each other. So the scribes always wrote on this side, which is the side with the fibers running horizontal relative to the lines of writing.
Great, that was my next question.
Yeah, and if you've got the fibers running vertical, it's probably not going to have writing on it. But you need to know what direction the writing is running in order to understand, of course, whether you're looking at the horizontal or the vertical fibers. The horizontal fibers will run along the length of the roll, and the vertical fibers, where the writing is, where the writing isn't, will run the width of the roll. No, I've got it wrong way around. When you think of the roll as a rectangle, the long sides will have the horizontal fibers and the writing. The short sides will be connected by vertical fibers.
That's very interesting. And is that quite consistent?
On the layer where the writing is. On the layer where the writing isn't, it will be the reverse.
Is that consistent across this collection?
Yes, I think it is.
And so I guess relatedly, you would not expect usually to find text that's sort of at a diagonal to the fiber pattern?
Never. And the reason is that it was very awkward to write against the fibers. You want to have the fibers on your side with the pen. If you've got the fibers at an angle, your pen is continually going to be colliding with the fibers, and it makes it more difficult to write.
That makes a lot of sense. I was also noticing, if you can go back to that previous picture where we had the overlap, if you still have that somewhere here.
I do.
I was noticing, I'm not seeing any writing on that joint area. Is that common, that they just kind of don't write there, or do they sometimes write there?
This is a very interesting question. It all depends on how the columns fall out. They didn't like to write across the join between the 2 sheets of papyrus. They much preferred to begin their lines after the colesis, that is, after the joint. And in this particular case, the scribe has actually left a wider interval than usual, because he didn't want to write against the edge, to run over the edge. But very often they don't have that option, and so they have to write across it. And when they write across it, it's much harder to see with the human eye.
Oh, why is that?
Because, we're always distracted by the ink. We're always looking for the ink and not the fibers.
Oh, I see. I see what you mean. It's harder to see where the joint is.
Yes.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
When you're looking for where the joint is, what visual cues are you going on? Are you trying to follow the papyrus fibers?
Yes, and it's very difficult for the human eye to deal with that. This is where AI could do a good job, I'm sure.
We've
there's
had
also-
some,
Yeah, go ahead.
just while we're still on the kind of papyrus and its layers and so on. There are some cases where it's hard for us to tell in CT images internally if we're looking at a single sheet that has delaminated, like the layers have separated from the carbonization process or otherwise, or if we're looking at two separate sheets. This is kind of an open-ended question. Do you have any advice or guidance on how we might navigate that?
Gianluca, do you want to try to answer that one?
I think it's not normal. I think in the city, the carbonization usually is not able to make differences between sheets. It's just something an action directly on the surface, but not is able. I think
he's talking about the difference between different volutes, let's say, and different layers of the same sheet, right? That's the question, right?
Right. Does it in fact happen that you would have one sheet come apart, or do you not really observe that?
Usually, the carbonization glue the different sheets.
Very rare. And anyway, you should be able to see the direction of the fiber. So if you have one sheet, on one side you should have the horizontal fibers, and on the other side you should have the vertical fibers. So if you have one sheet, it should be consistent, that you have the two different the different fibers on the two different sides.
Right.
If you had different layers of the same sheet, on one side, on one layer you should have, on both sides you should be able to see the horizontal fibers, and on both sides of the other layers you should be able to see the vertical fibers. But I don't think that's very common, the laminated layers in the same sheet, because as Gianluca Del Masso was mentioning, it's not very common that the carbonization leads to detachment of different layers.
The action is to glue together.
So the biggest problem is the cohesion of the roll. So you shouldn't have such problems when you're dealing with carbonized papyri.
Right, that makes sense.
I absolutely agree. I think that the Herculaneum papyri, unlike Egyptian papyri, tend not to come apart between the two layers. With Egyptian papyri, it's not uncommon. It's called when the papyrus is stripped. But I think it's rather rare that the papyrus strips in the Herculaneum collection. Over.
Do you see it even in very small cases, like in the form of bubbling on the surface?
No, I don't think so. What do you think, you two?
I don't think so.
Cool. Here's
the detachment of different layers, it derives from the opening of the scroll. So when you're talking about, if you're thinking of sovrapposti and sottoposti, so multiple layers of papyri that are detached from different layers or different volumes of the same scroll, that depends on the unrolling. So that's something that you have only in a later moment. You don't have it, you shouldn't have detached layers in rolled up.
There's a question that is kind of interesting on the YouTube chat, which is that in a different collection of papyrus, there's evidence of repair of papyrus with other patches of papyrus. Does that happen at all in the Herculaneum scrolls?
In Herculaneum papyrus, in Herculaneum scrolls, it happens.
Yes,
again,
especially in the final part, right? And the
sometimes
final
it's
sheet.
possible in the final sheet to have something like that. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very common, I don't think. But Gianluca is the real world expert on questions like that. No, actually, Mario Capasso has written on that, hasn't he? There is a book on an article of his on repairs in papyri, but I don't think it's very common.
Got it.
We've had multiple people ask about
sometimes there are people adding sheets to the end of papyrus.
Oh,
This is very common in some papyri. Some people, restorators, add the sheets at the beginning and at the end of papyrus, and the same people add a new title, and this is a way to restore papyri, particularly fragile at the beginning and at the end.
right.
It's like the way the cover of a book gets more damaged than the interior of a book.
Sure.
Is the scroll rolled in a consistent direction? Is the beginning or the end at the middle of the roll?
Nearly always the end is the middle and the beginning is the beginning, I would say. I don't think, do we have any cases, Gianluca or Federica, of scroll where they're rolled backwards?
Yes, there is just one case recorded by Mario Capasso in which the papyrus is unrolled in a non-final position of reading.
And so the text reads left to right, and so you would lay it out and start at the beginning and unroll as you go.
Yes.
That's interesting. So we've
that's one case in probably 800.
right. Yeah, we've had we haven't known, for example, like with the scroll behind me, this is a cross section. When imaging that scroll, we didn't know which was the top and which was the bottom of the scroll because we don't have text. But actually, if you look inside, you're saying that the roll direction is consistent. So if we sit down and think about it, we should be able to figure out which end of the scroll is the top and which is the bottom with reasonable probability, right?
Ah.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, so this, when we CT scan a scroll, an intact rolled scroll for which we don't have any text yet, we don't know at the beginning which end is the top and which is the bottom. So we don't know when we scan it if we've scanned it upside down or right side up. But if this is true that they're always rolled in the same direction, then by looking at whether this spiral goes clockwise or counterclockwise, it should tell us which way it is, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool. That's exciting. We'll go think about it. If I try to do it right now, I'm sure I'll get something simple wrong, but I'll go sit down and think about it.
It's a good idea for folks who are interested in these questions to make a model of a little bit of scroll with a little bit of writing inside, just a mock-up, and play with it. Because there's nothing like thinking of a physical model to show you how these things work in reality.
That is a great segue to my next question, which is we've had people ask about obtaining modern papyrus. It's easily done, but we've found it online. There are different vendors, but we've had people ask, do we know of any differences between the way that might be made or versus the material in Herculaneum?
A great question for Gianluca.
There are some research about the composition of our papyrus. The plant is the same, is the Cyperus papyrus, but there are a lot of different kinds of a plant. So at the moment, there is a research studying just the condition and the origin of our papyrus. Sometimes in some experiments we tried to reproduce an Herculaneum papyrus to see the effect of carbonization, and there are not very big differences between our papyri and a modern one. Is different the origin of a plant, the different kind of Cyperus papyrus, but at the end it's the same origin, it's the same family.
perhaps the quality may be
Yes.
different because so we have both papyrus on
Yes.
Amazon actually for making demonstration to high school students or something like that, and you can see that it just when you try to roll the papyrus up, it just cracks.
Yes.
So it is a bit different. The quality is different. So if we think that the roll that we have in the Villa dei Papiri were high quality books, so that should say something, because we have to consider that the papyrus paper, the papyrus sheets were of good quality in those cases. So probably not the same quality that you can find today.
In the very old Egypt, there was a very high quality, the best quality of papyrus. If you look at the scrolls, for example, coming from the first 1000 BC from Egypt, is a very high quality. In the Ptolemaic papyrus, the quality is a very important, but starting from the Roman period, the quality was every time, every century less elegant.
That's right.
Oh, they're breaking up, it seems.
My connection's
Internet issue.
good.
Have you still got me?
Yeah, we still have you. Well, we'll see if they can come back. Do you want to do one more question, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm looking for the image of that interesting spot. It might take me a second if you have another question right now.
Yeah, I guess sort of a basic question that we haven't really touched on yet is how do you, when you're reading this, sort of distinguish between similar looking letters, especially in areas where the papyrus might be damaged a bit? Like, how do you kind of infer it from context or stuff like that?
Well, very often extreme patience can actually enable you to distinguish between the letters. And I would say also that context does, but for that, you really need to know the language.
Right.
But it does take extreme patience, and I wrote about that in my article that I posted in the chat earlier, how to read and reconstruct a Herculaneum papyrus.
Right. Yeah, and then another question.
I will tell the listeners a funny story about which illustrates the problem of letter size as well. One time I was looking at a fragment and the letters seemed absolutely huge, and I decided that they must be a title, because sometimes at the very ends of the papyrus scrolls they wrote a title in bigger letters than the normal letters, much bigger letters. And but I couldn't read this title, and eventually, after a day or so of struggling with this thing, trying to read it, I turned it upside down and realized that it was Latin and it was not a title, because the Latin letters were so huge that they fooled me into thinking they were Greek letters that were a title. So if you get really huge letters, you may be dealing with Latin, which of course is much more like Spanish, and you know, people working on this may well know some Spanish.
Right.
It won't cause as many problems as Greek might, but the Greek is actually very simple. It doesn't have very many letters. It's only got 24 letters in the alphabet, so there aren't very many letters to distinguish. And the main confusions would be between alpha and delta. It depends a bit on the script. Alpha, delta, lambda, confused with each other. Omicron, epsilon, those are quite common. Yeah.
There was an interesting spot. I was looking for the picture, but I'm having trouble pulling it up, and I think it might take some back and forth, so I might follow up about that. I am curious to see what you all think of a spot we've found inside the CT. But I do have another question, which is, have we ended up with the most difficult cases where the easiest scrolls to unroll unrolled first, and everything that remains unrolled was left that way because it's harder?
Unfortunately, everybody thinks that's the case. Yes.
Mm.
These are the ones that they couldn't unroll physically. But I'm very glad they left them because now we have a chance.
Right. We're concluding, right, JP?
Yeah, maybe one last question if you have one more.
Well, do you have a question, Professor Janko?
No, I said I have time for another one.
Oh, okay. I have one more, which is sort of a just forward-looking question. What is your, or here, they're reconnecting. I'll wait so I can ask everybody this question.
Oh, great. Hello again.
Yeah.
Hi. I have one concluding question I'm curious to hear everyone's thoughts on, which is, what are you excited about here, and what's your best case scenario? Like, what would this look like? What's a success case for you? If this technology is able to start reading the scrolls, what happens in the future?
Well, I think we'll have hundreds more years of work to understand and process and treat all of this material. I think it will get people excited about it. I think it will make people realize just how much more the ancient world has to offer. It will refute the skeptics and the pessimists who think there's nothing new to know about the ancient world, and those who think it has nothing to teach us. So I'm very excited, and I wish everybody success. Over.
It's a lot of books about Philodemus, about Epicurus, about Stoics. It's possible to find everything in the other scrolls. Also works not coming from philosophy, but from other sciences. But is possible. It's is possible to find other works about Philodemus and about other philosophers, not coming from the medieval tradition. This is the importance of the Herculaneum papyri. They are the sole text from the antiquity, not coming from the medieval tradition. So we are on a direct approach to the authors.
And if it is possible to read the unopened scroll, that means that we have the possibility to enrich our understanding of the library of the villa. So also in terms of numbers of scrolls that still needs to be read, that would be great. And one thing I'm most excited about is the fact that potentially, if you look at an unopened scroll, you don't have any gaps in it because everything is kind of preserved. Everything is there. Right. You don't have multiple layers. You don't have sovrapposti and sottoposti. You don't have lacuna. You don't have gaps in the papyrus. So that would be great.
Do you guys think that there are still more scrolls in the ground that could be excavated if the villa was excavated some more?
I'm pretty certain about it. And I think one of the benefits of this project, this prize succeeding, which I really hope it will, it would be that it should show people that this is a unique place in the whole world. The only place in antiquity where a library was preserved, it was buried in conditions which assured its preservation. And in the Villa of the Papyri, there is a room which they drew on the plan. Nobody's ever seen it since the 18th century, where they had semicircular seating. So there was obviously a lecture hall, and that does show that there must have been, more books. This was what we have in the collection now is mainly just the books of a particular philosopher, Philodemus. Yep. But a great Roman like Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar, had to have more books than that in his Campanian villa, because when Cicero goes to Campania, he consults the villas of Faustus Sulla, and which actually contained the original manuscripts of Aristotle. There were huge libraries in these villas, and this one can't have been an exception. This was not a big library. What we have now are about 800 scrolls, and
Right.
you know, there were probably many thousands elsewhere in the villa.
Amazing. Well, on that note, let us conclude. So thank you so much to everyone participating, Richard Janko, Federica Nicolardi, Gianluca Del Mastro. Yeah, thank you so much. I think this was very enlightening.
Well, thank you. I hope
Questions
it's been
answered.
helpful.
Yeah, thank you all again. This is really exciting for me. I've learned a lot. I'm already excited to go back and take a second look at some images with some of the stuff I've just learned. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Right.
folks.
Have a good one. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.